Aquaman, Sovereign of the Oceans. Aquaman is Sovereign Lord of Atlantis, a founding member of the Justice League of America, superhero, and King of the Seven Seas. Sometimes known by the more commonplace name of Arthur Curry, he is one of the oldest and most famous superheroes in the DC universe. It would be easy to assume that with his commanding figure with blonde hair, blue eyes, superhuman strength, and the ability to survive underwater and persuade undersea creatures to do his bidding, that he would be the perfect superhero. However, a look beneath the surface reveals that Aquaman's life has been filled with tragedy, anger, and betrayal. Millennia ago, the Earth was struck by a comet, and the ancient civilization of Atlantis sank beneath the ocean. Despite this potentially fatal upheaval, the Atlanteans survived, thanks in no small part to the foresight of their benevolent king, Orin. Prior to the cataclysm, the king had ordered the construction of a protective dome around the city of Poseidonis, and it was that ultimately saved the Atlanteans from extinction. The Atlanteans had long been torn between the disciplines of science and sorcery, and nowhere was this schism more evident than in the rivalry between Orin and his blonde-haired brother, the sorcerer Shalako. A religious fanatic, Shalako branded all followers of science as heretics. He created a magical dome around the now partially destroyed city of Tritonis, establishing an underwater Atlantean community to rival Orin's. The twin cities developed similarly until Orin's scientists created a serum that would enable all Atlanteans to live outside the domes. The serum would make them truly aquatic, mutating their bodies to withstand the pressure of the deeps and allowing them to breathe water rather than air. Orin shared this development with the people of Tritonis, but Shalako magically cursed those of his people who took the serum. They developed scales and flippers, and over the centuries the people of Tritonis evolved into fish-tailed mer-people. Shalako's fit of pique cost him dearly. He was brutally slain by a mob of his former followers. Yet even in death, the sorcerer cast a long shadow over Atlantis. His grandson, Kordax, was born with blonde hair, scales, and the ability to command undersea creatures. Kordax failed in his attempt to conquer Poseidonis, and from then on Atlanteans believed blonde hair to be an omen of evil. It was a reminder of the magical and potentially insane side of the royal family. Centuries later, when Queen Atlanta gave birth to a blonde boy she named Orin, the child was abandoned on Mercy Reef for fear that he would one day become evil. Rather than drowning once the tide had retreated from Mercy Reef, however, Orin miraculously survived. It turned out he could breathe as easily on land as he did in the sea. Eventually, he was discovered by a school of dolphins and was adopted by a female called Porm. She named the boy Swimmer and helped him thrive in the often harsh environment of the Atlantic Ocean, though she found his initial attempts at staying afloat somewhat unimpressive. Once he was a teenager, Swimmer struck out on his own. One day he encountered a solitary lighthouse keeper named Arthur Curry, and the two developed a father-son relationship. Curry introduced his young charge to the marvellous complexities of the surface world, including the English language. Unfortunately, their idyllic existence was shattered when Curry was attacked by a band of hostile Atlantean warriors. He fought them off, keeping Swimmer safe and undiscovered, but made the ultimate sacrifice in the process. Before he died, he bequeathed his own name to his aquatic adopted son. From then on, Swimmer proudly referred to himself as Arthur Curry. Arthur now knew there were others like him, human beings who called the world's oceans their home, and he was determined to find them. His search first took him to Alaska, where he met and fell in love with an Inuit girl named Kako. The pair had a passionate affair, but Kako's jealous half-cousin, Orm Marius, attacked her, leaving her near death. Though Kako recovered, her family drove Arthur away. Homeless once again, he redoubled his efforts to find his own people. In the end, he simply stumbled across, or washed up on, Atlantis. His homecoming was far from joyous, however. The junta that ruled the undersea kingdom locked him up. Wearing an orange and green inmate's uniform, Arthur languished in prison for years. Not because he couldn't leave, his superhuman strength meant he could escape at any time, but because he was determined to find his mother, who was held somewhere in the prison. All he had was a memory of her face from when he was a baby, but he knew he would recognize her if he saw her. Eventually he spotted her, and enlisted the help of a fellow prisoner called Volko to teach him Atlantean, so that he could speak to his mother once they were reunited. Sadly, she died before the pair could exchange words. Furious, Arthur broke out of the prison and swam away from Atlantis. In the years that followed, Arthur became increasingly isolated, shunning contact with both Atlantis and the surface world, while perfecting his telepathic command over the creatures of the deep. However, when superhero the Flash persuaded the trickster across the ocean waves, Arthur reluctantly returned to the surface to see what was causing the commotion. Land dwellers took Arthur's prison garb to be a superhero costume, and the stylized Atlantean symbol on his belt to be the letter A. Thus, when he helped defeat the trickster, it was inevitable that the media would herald the emergence of a new meta-human crime fighter, Aquaman. Arthur took to his new role like a fish to water. He used his abilities to protect the oceans and combat such villains as Black Manta and the Fisherman. He even joined with the others to create the world's premier superhero team, the Justice League of America. When Arthur subsequently returned to Atlantis, he was a changed man, no longer an outcast, but a hero. Atlantis, too, had changed. Aquaman's prison breakout had inspired a revolution and a new government, which included Arthur's former cellmate Volko, had replaced the old regime. It was during this visit to Poseidonis that Aquaman learned that his mother had once been Queen of Atlantis. When the role of king was thrust upon him, he accepted it as a tribute to her memory. Aquaman finally found happiness when he met and married an extra-dimensional beauty called Mera. Together they had a son, who they named Arthur Curry Jr. He also got a crime-fighting partner, dubbed Aqualad. It seemed as though Aquaman had finally found the family and home he'd always wanted, but it would be all cruelly swept away. Aquaman went to the aid of another underwater city, which had fallen under the tyrannical rule of his arch-enemy Black Manta. Aqualad and Arthur Curry Jr. accompanied Aquaman on his quest, but Black Manta intercepted the trio and killed Arthur Jr. by trapping him inside a waterless globe. Aquaman's anguish at his son's death was immense, but he coped as best as he could. His wife Mera, on the other hand, was overwhelmed by grief over the loss of her son. She became increasingly erratic, and she even blamed Aquaman for their son's death. Eventually she left Aquaman, seeking solace in her home dimension. His family torn asunder, Aquaman abdicated his throne and left Atlantis to seek closer ties to the surface world. Arguing that the more powerful members of the JLA couldn't, or rather wouldn't, commit to the organization full-time, he reformed the team around a core of dedicated but less experienced heroes. Deciding their space satellite was too remote to serve as a base, the group set up a new headquarters where they could be closer to the common people. And so what was born what was people derisively referred to as Justice League Detroit. Despite protestations to the contrary, Aquaman couldn't deny his undersea heritage forever. Volko gave him the ancient book known as the Atlantis Chronicles, and thus Aquaman finally learned the truth about his family. Because of his mother's high social status, Aquaman had always assumed his father had been a member of the Atlantean aristocracy. But his mother's entry in the Atlantis Chronicles revealed that she had in fact been seduced by a millennia-old sorcerer named Atlan. Further revelations were to come. The Atlantis Chronicles prophesies that two brothers were always destined to battle for the control of Atlantis. It was obvious to Aquaman that he was one brother, but who was the other? It turned out to be an old enemy. In the years since their first encounter, Orm and Marius had taken on the role of Ocean Master and clashed with Aquaman many times. But neither suspected that they shared the same father, and thus were half-brothers. Ocean Master first employed technological means in his attempts to conquer Atlantis, but he was unfortunately drawn to the use of sorcery, and so it was that the brothers Aquaman and Ocean Master became locked in an eternal opposition, just as Orin and Shalako had been centuries earlier. The knowledge that his life had been somehow preordained, that he was not the reckless slimmer he thought himself to be, almost drove Aquaman insane. He retreated to his aqua cave, shutting himself away from the outside world once again. When he emerged from his self-imposed imprisonment, Aquaman had changed once more. He no longer looked like a stereotypical superhero. He now sported a long mane of unruly hair and a full beard. And these weren't just cosmetic changes, they reflected a deeper transformation. Aquaman's long-suppressed anger had come to the surface, and he had grown increasingly cynical. Significantly, he had taken to calling himself Orin rather than Arthur. However, his rage could not protect him from a villain called Charybdis, who planned to steal the Sea Lord's powers. When the two fought, he managed to plunge Aquaman's left hand into a piranha-infested pool. The hand was stripped to the bone. Instead of replacing it with a realistic-looking prosthetic, Aquaman grafted a harpoon spear to his arm. He later replaced this with a cybernetic harpoon from Star Labs, one fitted with a cable and reel that he could control telepathically. With the addition of a gladiatorial-style arm guard, Aquaman completed his transmission from clean-cut crime fighter to fearsome undersea warrior. This transformation couldn't have happened at a more fortuitous time, as Aquaman soon found himself leading a coalition of undersea peoples in the defense of the entire planet. To his astonishment, Aquaman discovered that Poseidonis rested on top of an ancient skull-shaped spaceship. The craft was sentient, and through a telepathic link, Aquaman learned that it had once belonged to an alien race called the Hunter-Gatherers. The extraterrestrials had attempted to conquer the Earth eons earlier, and were now returning to finish the job. In a bid to stop them, Aquaman sought out the 5 lost cities of Atlantis, and united them with Poseidonis and Tritonis in an alliance against the invaders. The conflict, which involved political maneuvers as well as military ones, ended with the aliens' retreat. In the course of the conflict, Poseidonis rose to the Earth's surface. After centuries of isolation, Atlantis was again transformed into a world power, and Aquaman was now a world leader. With their global status, Atlantis and Aquaman were in the front line when another threat to the world emerged, the so-called Imperiex, an energy force that was the embodiment of cosmic entropy, had targeted the Earth for destruction. Aquaman battled an Imperiex probe above Poseidonis, and both he and the city were thought destroyed in the resulting explosion. However, it soon became apparent that the former Aqualad, now the Sorcerer Tempest, had saved Atlantis by magically transporting it 3,000 years into the past. Trapped in the ancient Obsidian Age, the modern-day Atlanteans were enslaved by their own ancestors. The Atlantean High Priestess, Gamame, transformed Aquaman into a pool of living water. He languished in this liquid form for 15 years, until the Justice League embarked on a time-travelling mission to rescue him and his people. And so, many of his homecomings in the past, Aquaman's return to the 21st century was tinged with tragedy. At the climax of the Obsidian Age, still trapped as a living body of water, Aquaman had brought a deluge down upon ancient Atlantis, sending it plunging to the ocean floor. Back in the modern era, his people demanded justice for this crime, and for the years they spent in servitude. Aquaman was banished from Atlantis, upon pain of death. However, in a dream state, he discovered that he was able to access the Secret Sea, a mystical realm that flowed alongside the real world. Here he encountered the Lady of the Lake, who bestowed him on a new left hand of magical power. Here he encountered the Lady of the Lake, who bestowed on him a new left hand of magical water. For a time, Aquaman served as the lady's water-bearer, a champion that defended the magical waterways from threats to their ecology. However, Aquaman, or Arthur, as he was once again calling himself, was soon embroiled in more human-centric, though no less dramatic, events. When an earthquake plunged half of San Diego into the Pacific Ocean, Arthur was one of the first on the scene. What he found in the sunken ruins was incredible. There were some survivors who could no longer breathe on land. An investigation revealed that a mutagenic virus based on Aquaman's DNA had been secretly administered to the people of San Diego, and when the city was submerged, they were changed into water breathers. Realizing that he was perhaps the only person who could help the survivors adjust to their new situation, Arthur became the protector of the so-called Sub-Diego. There was worse to come, however. During the universe-altering Infinite Crisis, Atlantis himself was destroyed by the otherworldly entity known as the Spectre, and her people were scattered far and wide. At the same time, the always rational Aquaman turned to dark magics in order to raise part of Sub-Diego back onto dry land. The spell worked, but at a cost. Arthur was transformed into the Dweller of the Depths, a confused tentacle creature with no clear memory of his past. The Dweller eventually encountered a water-breather calling himself Arthur Joseph Curry, and was convinced that this young man was actually Aquaman, just now starting on his heroic voyage. However, over time the truth was revealed. Arthur Joseph was in fact the nephew of Arthur Curry, the lighthouse keeper who had raised Aquaman. Years earlier, Arthur Joseph's scientist father had used Aquaman's genetic material to revive his son by turning him into a water-breather. When the boy died, Aquaman visited the boy's father. While in conversation, the distraught scientist surreptitiously took a sample of the mystical water from Aquaman's hand. The waters revived Joseph by bestowing on him a portion of Orin's soul. But before the full ramifications of all of this could be explored, the Dweller was killed, and an angry Joseph was left searching for a way to become a worthy inheritor of the Aquaman title. Orin, swimmer, Arthur, Joseph. 2 men, many names, but in the end, only one Aquaman. A man who, despite life's storms, has been a constant beacon of truth and justice, a shining light in often murky waters. And it's for this reason, above all others, that Aquaman should be considered true king of the 7 seas.